You should do stuff in your life that's worth writing about. So not that you have to do this really great, huge thing, but you should be pursuing something better and trying to do something that's worth either you writing about or someone else writing about. But also, if you're going to write something worth reading. If you were to look at something like Tara Westover's Educated, she talks about her life, but her main focus is the title of the book, Educated, like the role of education in her life. Both not being educated, because she grew up in a fundamentalist family in Idaho, and her dad didn't believe in education. So when she finally was able to get education, it was like this really big life-changing thing for her. And so she writes about just the power of education and the power of knowledge. Fun fact, at an AP conference, I actually met someone who lived in the same small town in Idaho that she lived in. Very different life story. He's a gay man who lives now on the East Coast, and she is a white woman who was living in a very fundamentalist Mormon family in the outside of the town. But that was kind of a fun fact when I met him. I was like, really? He doesn't like to talk about it much. If you look at Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy, same thing. He's writing about his life as a lawyer and his experiences as a Black man who's a lawyer, but also he's writing particularly about the justice system. So then he's using his memoir and his story to tell about the justice system. So I highlighted some of my favorites. To write a memoir, you need to read memoir. If you're going to write your own story and make it so people want to actually read your story, you probably should read other people's memoirs too. And it's an important thing to read, period. Everybody should read. Not just because reading is good for you, but it is. But if you want to write, you have to read. I just finished reading Stephen King's writing memoir on writing. And the first part of the book, he talks about all of his experiences as a writer, but he really makes a big point when he starts talking about the craft of writing, of how important it is to read. You have to read. Because if you don't know what good writing looks like, you're never going to be able to be a good writer. You're just not going to know how to do it. You learn the craft by reading the craft. And so you get a feel for writing style. I started 5 years ago just because I was like, I'm just going to take all these stories. So our family does a lot of camping, and I write about our camping trips and all the different things that we've done. And I was like, I'm going to write a camping memoir, which was really a big thing to undertake. And I was like, it did not go anywhere. I think I have 70,000 words and it didn't go anywhere. So I'm telling you, you can write a lot of words and it can be nothing. But I'm going to go back to it, and I am returning back to it. And I'm discovering now as I'm returning to chapters, and after I went through as I would be outlining it, is the reading I've done in the last 5 years has informed how I want to approach this next book. Like, I've seen how other people put their memoirs together, and I've seen how other people write about their experiences, and it's not always linear. And sometimes there's some really weird hopping around that happens, but that hopping around has a purpose. I discovered that a lot when I was reading Dave Grohl's Storyteller, which is amazing. And funny and sad, and it just made me laugh out loud while running, which is probably not the best thing when you're doing a 3-mile run to be laughing out loud at somebody's writing. But it's not linear. Like, he does talk in a linear fashion about his experiences as a musician and going through and talking about being in Nirvana and this starting Foo Fighters and all of his experiences there, but he keeps hopping around. Like, he'll be in 2015 and then he'll be back in 1997. So he just goes, but it fits because he's dealing thematically with different things. And I've learned in reading other people's stories that when you do that, you can put together a narrative that works. You can put together a narrative that makes sense. So it doesn't have to be all in order. Because you know what? Sometimes telling everything in order is boring. And it doesn't work. And it doesn't make sense. And so that one was really powerful in seeing how he put it together. I just finished Beth Moore's book, All My Knotted Up Life. And she does a lot of stuff that's linear, but she does hop around when necessary. She goes backwards when she needs to give backstory to a situation and to something that happened in the present and where she is and what she's writing about. She does those flashbacks just to give you some insight into what's actually happening. So, next. So stats. This is important to know. It doesn't just happen overnight, and you don't come up with stuff overnight. So since 2012, which is when I started my first blog, when I was in grad school, and we had a house that was literally falling apart around us because it was a fixer-upper, and I had a toddler and an infant, I was like, hey, let's start a blog. So I started writing about just what was happening. I wanted to write about our house because I was like, somebody else, it was in the middle, we were still in the middle of the housing crash. Things were still falling apart. A lot of people were still losing their houses. There were people that were buying foreclosures. This is what was happening in adult life. You guys don't care, but this is what was happening to adults in adult life. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to start writing about this because other people might also be trying to figure out how they're going to turn their 1950s Mamie Eisenhower pink bathroom into something that they actually appreciate. So that's what we started doing. And it was, and I wrote about the house and I wrote about some other things just because I felt like it, like we did an anniversary. Well, it was an anniversary trip, but my husband and I took a trip to Gettysburg for the 150th anniversary of Gettysburg. So we wrote about that a little bit, and I experimented. And then I switched over from Blogger to WordPress, and we moved to Texas because I wanted to write about Texas because this was new for all of us. My husband and I are both Midwesterners. I lived in Wyoming for 5 years, but I'm a Midwesterner. So living in Texas was going to be different and weird, and we just wanted to write about this whole move to Texas. And so I started writing about that and just basically everything under the sun, anything that struck my fancy, and then a lot of travel type stuff. And now I've switched over to Substack because I like Substack better. And it's just it's a cleaner platform and it works better for me. And one of the questions that was asked for announcements today, which I'll be honest, I do not like being interviewed on camera. I'm videotaping this, but I do not like being interviewed on camera. I don't mind podcasting because nobody sees my face. But as we were looking at as I was planning that and talking about, well, where do you find time to write? Everyone has a hobby. That's my hobby. I will choose to write over reading. I love reading, but if I'm going to choose to sit and do something, I will write. And I think it's just because I need to have my fingers moving. I need to be doing something. Otherwise, I will fall asleep. And it's not because I don't want to read. It's because I am going. I'm a mom that goes, and I'll fall asleep if I sit down. So I just don't. However, I do a lot of audiobooks, and I do sit and read books when I can get myself to do it. It's really helpful to do it while my students are reading, so that gives me reading time too. So I like to read with my students as well. But I added them up, and since 2012, that's 401, which is a lot of writing. And it's a lot of words. It's a lot of words. And I know it's a lot of words. And so there's a lot there. Reading matters, and I wanted to bring up the stat. I started tracking on Goodreads way later than everybody else did, but I finally got a Goodreads account in 2019. And so since then, I've read 151 books. Some of them have been audio. Actually, a lot of them have been audio. I'm training for a half marathon in St. Louis in 2.5 weeks. And so I got 2.5 hours of a book read on Saturday because I was running 11.4 miles. And so I just kept listening to a book the whole time I was running. May not be the most exciting thing to listen, but I like it because then it gives me something to keep going because then I can just focus on what I'm reading. We listen to books on trips when we travel, so our family listens to books. Sometimes it's hard to get everybody to agree, and we're kind of all in this weird age moment where we're trying to figure out what everyone can and wants to read at the same time. But as a family, we listen to the whole Harry Potter series, we listen to the Percy Jackson series, we listened to a bunch of Ramona books one year on vacation, so I listened to the whole we all listened to the whole Ramona series. Well, my son immersed himself in movies because he didn't want to listen to Ramona. So my husband, my daughter, and I listened to all the Ramona books and Ralph the Mouse and Ralph and the Motorcycle and that whole series, which was, I had never listened to the Ralph books before. They were delightful. So I track those and I make sure that I have all those, but that's a lot of reading. And I just want to point out that being in books matters. And it's everything from graphic novels to memoirs and novels and everything in between. And sometimes it takes a long time. We did buy The Stand on Audible because my husband and I wanted to listen to it, and it's 50 hours long, and the only way we're going to get through it is if we bought it. So we did, and we would listen to it on walks, and we would listen to it in the car when we left the kids at home because we weren't listening to The Stand with the kids. But we did all that. And I want to also point out with drafting, you are going to cut stuff out. The Stephen King rule is actually 10%. So take that into consideration, that his books are 10% shorter than what his rough drafts are. So think of how many words he wrote before he got to that final draft.
Right.
And he doesn't just take out 10%, like he's adding and taking out 10% at the same time. So my rough draft was 50,000 words. I went through a lot of blog posts and I was like, I'm going to look thematically and try to put them all together. And I started out with 50,000, which would have probably gotten me to 200 pages, which is what I was kind of aiming for. And after working with the beta team, which is a group of people that read your book with you and give you feedback, people I trusted, we cut it down to 46,000 words. And that's with a lot of revision. That's with me adding stuff. That's with me adding like acknowledgements pages and everything else. And so there was a lot of revision that went into that. So just to think that those stats matter. So if you're going to write, just be ready to do those things. Okay, next one. Okay, this is Mrs. Laker's favorite.
This is my favorite chapter.
So
this is why you got a tattoo. Oh, wow.
This is her favorite one.
And also because I am anti-tattoo and my daughters are pro-tattoo. And they promised me when they were your age they would never get a tattoo. And they are now not your age and they have tattoos.
Yeah. Yep. I don't have anything against tattoos, but I was never going to be a tattoo person.
The Laker girls birthday.
Yeah. Do you have one?
I do not.
Not yet?
Not yet.
I hate pain. I don't know anyone who really loves pain, but I actively avoid it. I begged for epidurals with both babies. I dislike the dentist. I put off things when I know they will probably hurt. So I buried my desire for a tattoo for years because why would I intentionally cause myself pain for a permanent mark on my body? I played games of what if in my head. I considered what I would want tattooed on my body and where I would want said tattoo. I even admired the tattoos of others, but I always came back to the thought, nope, I don't want the pain. But when your head and heart have experienced tremendous pain, when you are trying to heal from deep hurt, sometimes you need to just embrace pain that you choose. When I told Jeff, he initially balked. His wife hates pain. His wife would never have suggested spending money on something so permanent. Let's just say he was skeptical that I would go through with it. But he showed tremendous support despite his misgivings. He researched how to make temporary tattoos so that we could practice different types of scripts on different parts of my arm. He looked up different fonts so we could decide which one looked most like me. We transferred ink and I sat with different versions for a few weeks before I finally decided it was time to make it official. Then I gripped my uncertain husband's hand and sat while I allowed my skin to be permanently marked with the Hebrew words, Aishet Hayil, a woman of valor. A woman who follows Jesus and understands the cost of standing by her principles. A woman who acknowledges her sinful nature and embraces the forgiveness found in a crucified and risen Christ. A woman who chooses justice and loves a God who asks her to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. A mark on my arm that will remind me of this every day for the rest of my life. A few months after I got my tattoo, I finally sat down to read the copy of A Year of Biblical Womanhood that had been sitting on my shelf since shortly after Rachel held Evan's death. I chose the words for my arm because I had read enough by and about Evans that I knew these were the words I needed as a daily reminder. But as I dove into her year-long journey through biblical lessons of womanhood, everything I read confirmed my decision to have the words written on my arm. She reminds readers that the Proverbs 31 woman is a star not because of what she does, but how she does it, with valor. On one of many walks that Jeff and I took in the months following our loss, as we discussed options for both me and our family, I suddenly stopped him and said, "You didn't marry a warrior." He responded, "Sure I did. You just hadn't figured out what you had to fight for yet." There are other tattoos I could get that commemorate big changes in my life, but this one summarizes where I was in the moment and where I wanted to be headed. As I moved on from a transformative winter with a new tattoo emblazoned on my wrist right before the buds started to arrive for an early Texas spring, I had no regrets. And this was the book, which I then read, finally. I had it, but it's right here. My sister also has it, but she got it before me. So she can't claim that she copied me. I copied her, but she has hers up here. So she has that there. Okay. Questions? Eva.
How long does it take to publish a book?
Well, I think I collected everything. When did I have everything? I had put together my essentially second draft, which was all a collection of all my first draft pieces, by maybe September of last year. And then I gave it to my beta team, and they took a little bit longer than I wanted them to. They took about 2 months to all get back to me and to give me feedback. And I spent Christmas break doing final revisions, and then got it before the end of Christmas break to my friend who I paid, because you should pay people to do these things. Especially if they're doing something, they're not doing a favor for you, like you want to pay them to do those things. I sent it to a friend in Michigan who then was my editor. So she went through and she edited the whole thing for me. And then another friend did the artwork for the cover. So then I had to get the cover. I mean, I'm working and I'm a mom. So it took me but in the time I had, it would take me probably another 3 months after the draft. Like I said, the one I'm working on now, I've been working on for 5 years, like off and on. So if you're working all by yourself and you have nothing else going on, you could probably do it in 2 to 3 months. But it's not something you want to rush though either. You want to take your time.
Right.
And make sure it's good. And let things breathe. It's always a good thing to put things on a shelf and just let it breathe and then go back to it, because you might discover something new while you're waiting for it to go back.
That's good. Find something in dreams, as I always say.
Yeah.
It's true. Some inspiration comes from my dreams.
So just wait for the dream.
Do you have a notebook in your nightstand, Eva?
I have a binder.
That's good. First songwriters do that.
Yes.
I was just gonna ask, when you was writing your book, how did you start it off? Did you start from the dawn of time, the beginning of time? Or, did you start where you thought?
This one was thematic. So so there are pieces that don't go in order, and actually my beta team had me rearrange pieces even after I had it in an order that I kind of liked. So the first one was for the first section is growth. And then the second section is place. So, because I've moved around a lot in over 40 years. The third section is motherhood, for obvious reasons. I've been a mom for almost 14 years now. And then the last one is healing. It's because they all thematically work with the whole journey idea, but then each one has their own theme that go with it. So that's how I picked those. And that's how I decided where I started. The camping memoir is starting flash forward, flashback. So my first chapter actually is the camping trip I took with my husband when we were engaged, and we went out to Colorado to visit his sister. And so I started with that because that's what got me into camping, because I was not a camping girl. So it got me into camping. And then I flashed back in the next chapter because there's a reason why I'm not a camping girl. It's because of a couple unfortunate incidents as a child, including one in the Black Hills with a thunderstorm, intense. So going through those. So talking about as a kid, I always loved the outdoors, but camping was not for me. And we tried to convince our parents after our tent didn't collapse, because my sister and I were in the tent that was the good tent, but everybody else's tent collapsed in the middle of this thunderstorm that swept through the Black Hills, and their tent fell over and they ended up sleeping in the van. And my sister, who lives in town, is still bitter about the fact that she didn't get to climb Devil's Tower because she had wet shoes. And it's been 30 years almost, and she's still a little bit bitter about that. And that one is going to be, especially after reading Dave Grohl's book, that's going to be chronological-ish. So like I'll flash back with things that fit in that particular section, but it will be also chronological. So, yeah.
Did you have your parts already? Like, I want to do growth, I want to end with healing,
Mm-hmm.
and then you chose the blog post that you're going to put in there?
Yeah. And then some of them got rearranged because they liked the order better, and they were right. Listen to people. If there's consensus, listen to other people. It's always good to get other people's feedback. Yeah.
How did you get your beta?
I used Facebook, but they were all people I knew. So like I had a couple people that are just online friends that I haven't actually met in person. So there were like 2 people who are online friends I hadn't met in person. My student teaching partner, who I was also in 2 writing groups with in college, who we lived in Houston at the same time for 3 months. I'm actually running for 3 years. I'm actually running with her in the Houston half marathon in 3 weeks. She's on my team, but she's been one of my beta readers. Like, just, we've read each other's stuff since we were in college. My podcasting partner was another one. Again, she's another one of my beta. She's like reads. They're my first readers. Like if I'm going to pick somebody outside of my family, those 2 are my first readers for almost everything. Another college friend who is a junior high English teacher, and then another friend from Texas that just was like, I want to do it. I was like, okay, whatever. It was probably bigger than it should have been. It was 10 people, which is actually a lot bigger than you probably should have 5. But for the first time around, I had that many people that were like, I want to try. And I had one former student actually who is a teacher, and she wanted to do it. So it was that way I could get a variety of perspective. So
Who would you have used if you didn't have all those friends?
I honestly don't know, because I have lots of writer friends. I'm an English teacher, so I have a lot of friends who are English teachers, and a lot of friends who, at this point now, we're at the age where a lot of us may not have books published, but we've done articles, and we've just put things out. So we all have different varying degrees of things that we put out there, but I honestly don't know how I would do it, how I would find people.
You ask your high school English teacher to find people for you.
Yeah, well, if it's you guys, yeah, you find your high school English teacher to find somebody for you. I probably wouldn't ask my peers yet. Because first of all, I know what it was like in high school. Nobody wants to tell anybody the truth about their writing. They don't want to be honest. And second of all, they just don't have the life experience. And that's when I was trying to put my beta team together, that's what I wanted. I wanted to be a beta team that had a variety of both experience with reading and experience in life, which is why when one of my former students, and she's a slightly older former student, she is one of my students from Fort Wayne, but when she offered, I was like, yeah, that's great, because you're in your mid-20s, you're kind of like the low end of what my audience would typically be, but at least gives me some perspective. So that was good. For this next one, I'm going to need a beta team of people who actually know the outdoors. Like if they're a city person, no. I mean, if they're a city person who loves the outdoors, that's fine. But like, if they're a person who would rather stay at a Hyatt as opposed to anything else, they're probably not my key audience. What I'm aiming for.
I'm more outdoorsy in summertime because my family owns a lake cottage, and it's in a rural town. So all we have is the lake, a small cottage, 2-bedroom, and we mostly are outside all day.
Then you are the audience.
Then yeah, that you would be the audience. Yep.
You will relate. You will love it.
I know, I've been camping one time, a special needs camp. My first time camping, and I liked it.
Where was it? Was it Camp Rancho Formosa or no?
No, it was Victory Lane, and it's a private. I'm not sure what camp it is, but it was more geared to like special needs kids with autism, Down syndrome, and it was really good. It's my entry to camping, and my parents are thinking of taking me camping during summertime.
It's a good time. My kids love it. Anyone else? Yeah.
Did you have to like draw the cover by yourself, or did you like hire a good drawing?
I have a friend another college friend. Hold on to your college friends, guys. High school friends, yes. But like the college friends, they're the ones that are going into professions and they're like learning. They're the ones that know their craft. Okay, so hold on to them. But a college friend is an artist. He's actually an art teacher in Wisconsin now. We also he lived in the same place. We lived in Texas for 6 years, and he was already there when we moved down there, but he spent a lot of time at our house. And so I finally was like, I asked him, actually, this was a picture from when we were in Hawaii. My husband and I went to Hawaii last year. And so I really wanted that picture, but I was trying to use Canva and trying to be really smart with AI and trying to do like an artwork thing with Canva, and it wasn't working. I wanted watercolor and I couldn't get the watercolor thing to work. And I was like, Matt, do you think you could make me a watercolor version of this photo? I thought he was going to plug it into like Adobe and was going to give me some AI. No, he actually painted a watercolor.
Oh, that's neat.
So he painted the watercolor, scanned it for me. And so I did the rest of the design on Canva, but he did the artwork.
Did you have to like pay him?
I did pay him.
So I was like, I don't think I would have a friend like that.
He might have been willing to do it for me, but I was like, yeah, you're doing actual art for me. This wasn't just you plugging it into something and having fun with it. So yeah, I paid him.
We have time for one more question, and then we'll do our door prizes and a group photo at the end. Anybody else will need to have a burning question to ask?
Yes.
What was your worst and least favorite part about the entire book?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not a patient person, so it was hard to wait. And it was hard. And there were times I wanted to work on it, but it was December. There's stuff going on with family. Like when you want to work, when you really want to work on a project, any project, and everybody keeps getting in your way, including yourself. Yeah, that was probably my least favorite part because I really just wanted to finish the thing. My favorite part, I think there were probably two parts. One's going to be weird and one's not. I really loved going through all those old pieces, and sometimes I would be reading stuff I wrote and I was like, I wrote that? And that's kind of fun because you're like, oh, I wrote something really good. I'm really proud of myself, but it was a while ago. But also seeing myself progress as a writer, like I could see that progress. I could see the things I wrote 8-9 years ago and I was like, that was okay. But I could see the progress of how I've grown as a writer, which was really fun too. And I enjoyed that. And then the kind of weird thing was I got to use my 6 years as a yearbook advisor when I was doing all the formatting stuff. And that was weirdly fun. Like the whole self-publishing thing, doing the formatting and figuring that all out and then learning new things that I didn't know ever existed in Microsoft Word was kind of fun. It's just a different thing.